It was 3 a.m. when I found myself standing in my backyard, armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, ready to confront a thief. But this wasn't your typical burglar. No, this was a water thief. I stared at the ground where my well used to overflow with fresh, clean water. Now, it was reduced to a pathetic trickle. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining things. But no, the water was vanishing right before my eyes. I followed the faint sound of slurping, an eerie gurgling noise that led me straight to the fence separating my property from Linda's. And then I saw it, a garden hose snaking from my well, disappearing under the fence into Linda's yard. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might break a tooth. Linda. Of course, it was Linda. The same neighbor who once reported my mailbox for being too blue for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The same woman who borrowed my Amazon package and then insisted it was delivered to her by mistake, even though it had my name on it. And now, she was stealing my well water. I yanked the hose with all my strength, hearing a shriek from the other side of the fence, followed by a splash. A second later, Linda's voice screeched into the night. "Mark, what do you think you're doing?" I stormed around to her front yard, not caring that I was in my pajamas, and found her standing next to her above-ground pool, one that was now gushing water onto her lawn, thanks to the severed hose. "Are you serious, Linda? You're stealing my well water." I pointed at the still dripping hose in my hand. She gasped, clutching her chest as if I had just accused her of murder. "Mark, don't be ridiculous. Water is a natural resource. It belongs to everyone." I could feel my eye twitch. "No, Linda. That's my well. My property. You can't just siphon it off like you own it." Linda huffed, looking around as if searching for a camera crew to come to her defense. "Oh, come on, Mark. It's just water. You wouldn't even notice if you weren't being so paranoid. And besides," she sniffed, "your well is closer to my fence than it is to your house. Technically, some of that water is mine." I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to scream. "That is not how property ownership works, Linda." She waved me off. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's not like I'm stealing. I'm just redistributing nature's gift." I pointed at her flooded lawn. "You filled your entire pool with my well water." Linda crossed her arms, her face twisting into that smug, self-righteous expression she always wore when she was about to say something absurd. "Well, if you weren't so selfish, you'd let your neighbor have a little water. But no, Mark has to be the neighborhood Scrooge. I bet you'd charge kids for lemonade if they set up a stand in front of your house." I clenched my fist. There was no reasoning with Linda. I should have known. I turned on my heel and walked back to my house, already plotting my revenge. She thought she could steal from me and gaslight me into thinking I was the bad guy? Not a chance. The next morning, I installed a security camera pointed directly at my well. I even placed a decoy hose filled with red-dyed water leading from the well to the fence. If Linda tried her little stunt again, she'd be in for a surprise. And oh, she did not disappoint. That afternoon, I checked the footage, and there she was, slinking around like a raccoon, uncoiling the hose and stuffing it under her fence. A few minutes later, a loud shriek echoed across the neighborhood. I strolled over to Linda's yard, suppressing a grin. She was standing next to her pool, hands covered in red dye, looking like she had just committed a murder. "Mark, what did you do?" she screeched. "Oh, just a little test to see who's been stealing my water," I said, folding my arms. "Looks like we have our answer." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "This is illegal. You poisoned my water supply." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you admit it's my water?" Her face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "That's not the point," she sputtered. "I could call the HOA on you." I burst out laughing. "Linda, you just admitted to stealing my water on camera. If anyone's calling the HOA, it's me." Linda's expression flickered between fury and panic. Then, as if flipping a switch, she suddenly put on a fake smile. "Oh, come on, Mark. Let's not be petty. We're neighbors. We should be looking out for each other. What's a little water between friends?" I narrowed my eyes. "You reported me last month for having my trash bins an inch too close to the curb." Linda waved a dismissive hand. "That's different. That was a community concern." I took out my phone. "You know what, Linda? I think the community would love to see this footage. Maybe even the local water authority." Her face drained of color. "You wouldn't." I grinned. Oh, I absolutely would. And just like that, the war had begun. That night, Linda went on a full-blown damage control campaign. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook page, spinning the story to make herself the victim. I just wanted to enjoy my summer and cool off in my pool, she wrote. But some people in this neighborhood would rather be cruel and deny others the simple joys of life. It's so sad when neighbors can't share the earth's natural gifts. She even posted a photo of herself looking all sad next to her half-empty pool. I had to give her credit. She knew how to play the game. But I wasn't about to let her win. The next morning, I called the HOA, the town's water authority, and just for fun, the local news. If Linda wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready. Little did she know, she had just poked the wrong bear. I woke up the next morning to a knock on my door, half expecting to find Linda standing there with one of her fake friendly smiles. I braced myself before opening it, but instead of my water-stealing neighbor, it was Rick, the head of the HOA, standing on my porch with his clipboard and his usual look of self-importance. Before I could even say anything, he started talking. "Mark, we need to have a discussion regarding a complaint that was filed against you," he said, flipping through his notes like he was conducting an FBI investigation. I blinked. "Let me guess, Linda?" Rick sighed, rubbing his temple. "I'm not supposed to disclose that, but yes, she's reported you for harassing a neighbor, engaging in water sabotage, and setting up unauthorized surveillance." I let out a laugh. "So let me get this straight. She steals my water, I catch her, and now I'm the one in trouble?" Rick gave me a tired look. "Look, Mark, you know how these things go. We have to investigate all complaints, no matter how ridiculous they sound. Do you have any proof that Linda was actually stealing your water?" I grinned and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the footage from my security camera. "Oh, I have proof. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Rick took one look at the video and shook his head. "Of course it's Linda. It's always Linda." I crossed my arms. "So what now? Are you going to find her, or is she going to find a way to weasel out of this like she always does?" Rick exhaled sharply. "We'll have to hold a meeting about this. But I'll be honest with you, Mark, Linda has been a pain in the HOA's backside for years. But she knows how to play the game. She donates to HOA events, attends all the meetings, and somehow convinces people that she's just a concerned neighbor." I smirked. "Well, then it's time we show the neighborhood who she really is." That evening, the HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread fast, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up to watch the drama unfold. Linda was already there, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed, looking smug as ever. Rick cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started. We've had a complaint filed regarding a dispute between two neighbors over water usage. Mark, since you're the accused, you get to speak first." I stood up, taking my time as I looked around the room. "Thanks, Rick. I'd love to explain my crime. You see, my well water has been mysteriously disappearing over the last few weeks. So, like any sane person, I decided to investigate. And guess what I found? A hose leading from my well straight into Linda's yard." Murmurs spread through the crowd, but Linda stood up, her voice loud enough to silence the room. "This is ridiculous. Mark has been harassing me for weeks over a tiny bit of water. He's just a bitter old man who can't stand the idea of a woman enjoying her summer in peace." I smirked, holding up my phone. "Funny you say that, Linda, because I have video evidence of you stealing from my property. Care to explain that?" Linda's face went pale, but she recovered quickly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "That's completely taken out of context. I was just checking to make sure Mark's well wasn't leaking into my yard. As a responsible homeowner, I thought it was my duty to investigate." Someone in the crowd snorted. "So you investigated by hooking up a hose and draining it into your pool?" Rick held up his hand. "Linda, we have the footage. There's no context that changes the fact that you were illegally using someone else's water." Linda let out a forced laugh. "Oh, come on, come on. It's just water. It's not like I was stealing gold bars from his basement." Rick shook his head. "That's not the point. The HOA has strict guidelines about property disputes, and taking someone's well water without permission is a violation. You'll be fined accordingly." Linda gasped dramatically. "Are you kidding me? This is outrageous. I contribute to this community more than anyone here, and I'm being treated like a criminal over a little water." Rick sighed. "Linda, you've had multiple complaints filed against you over the years, and honestly, we've let a lot slide. But this is blatant theft. You'll also be required to have your plumbing inspected to ensure you're not illegally modifying any water lines. Linda clenched her fists, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. This isn't over. You're all going to regret this. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. A moment of silence hung in the air before someone started clapping. Then another. And soon, the entire room erupted in applause. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me, shaking my hand and thanking me for finally standing up to Linda. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she had terrorized over the years. By the next morning, Linda was already on the defensive. She went on a full-blown PR campaign, posting on the neighborhood Facebook group about how she was being targeted and bullied. She claimed she was the victim of a witch hunt and that certain people in the community couldn't handle a strong woman standing up for herself. Unfortunately for her, the tide had turned. People weren't buying her act anymore. The comments were brutal. So stealing from your neighbor is standing up for yourself now? Didn't you report Mrs. Thompson last year for having too many flowers in her yard? But we're supposed to feel sorry for you, Linda? You literally stole someone's water and got caught in 4K. Just take the L and move on. Linda stopped replying after that. I figured that was the end of it, but then I saw something that made my blood boil. A city inspection notice taped to my front door. I ripped it off and read it. Apparently, someone had reported my well for potentially unsafe water conditions, triggering an official inspection from the local water authority. I didn't need 3 guesses to know who was behind it. Linda was trying to fight back, but she didn't realize she had already lost. Because if she wanted to play the legal game, I was more than ready. I picked up my phone and made a call. Yeah, hi. I'd like to report an individual for illegally modifying their water lines. I have video proof. If Linda thought she was going to win this, she was in for a rude awakening. The city inspector arrived at my property the next morning, clipboard in hand, ready to scrutinize every inch of my well. He introduced himself as Mr. Lopez, a tired-looking man who clearly had better things to do than investigate a baseless complaint. I could already tell by the way he sighed while explaining the process that he knew exactly what was going on. He had probably dealt with people like Linda before. I'll make this quick, he said, adjusting his glasses. We've had a report about potential contamination in your well water. Standard procedure requires us to take samples and check your filtration system. I crossed my arms. And let me guess, the report came from a concerned neighbor? He gave me a knowing look. I can't say who filed it, but let's just say I see this kind of thing a lot. I led him to the well, where he conducted his test with minimal enthusiasm. As he worked, I noticed Linda peeking from behind her curtains, watching like a nosy hawk waiting for its prey to fall. She probably thought she had finally found a way to get back at me. I imagined she was picturing my well being shut down, forcing me to buy city water while she smirked from her porch. After about 20 minutes, Mr. Lopez straightened up and shook his head. Your water's fine. No contamination, no safety concerns. Honestly, it's cleaner than most of the city's supply. I couldn't help but grin. So what happens now? He packed up his equipment. Well, since this was a false report, I have to file a statement about it. If we get too many bogus complaints from the same person, we start issuing fines for wasting city resources. I glanced at Linda's window, just in time to see her duck out of sight. You don't say. He nodded. Yep. And since I'm already in the neighborhood, I should probably check out the person who made the complaint, just to make sure their water system is up to code. I had to fight the urge to laugh. You know, that sounds like a fantastic idea. 10 minutes later, I was back inside my house, sipping coffee and watching the most glorious scene unfold. Mr. Lopez knocked on Linda's door, and after a brief muffled argument, she reluctantly let him in. I could only imagine what he was finding. If Linda had been stealing my well water, there was a good chance she had been tampering with her own system as well. I didn't have to wait long for results. About an hour later, I heard Linda's shrill voice echo across the street. You have got to be kidding me. This is harassment. Mr. Lopez exited her house, shaking his head and scribbling on his clipboard. Linda followed, flailing her arms like a lunatic. I didn't know the connection was illegal. I thought the pipes were just there when I moved in. He didn't even look at her as he spoke. Ma'am, tampering with city water lines is a violation of municipal code. You'll be receiving a fine, and you'll need to have a licensed plumber correct the issue immediately. Linda turned red. But, But what about his well? Why does he get to have his own water supply? Mr. Lopez finally looked up, clearly exhausted. Because it's his private property, and he's not breaking the law, unlike you. Linda looked like she was about to explode. She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. I stood by my window, sipping my coffee, feeling like a king watching his enemies fall. The next few days were pure bliss. Linda, for once, was silent. No complaints, no passive-aggressive notes, no surprise HOA violations. She had finally been put in her place. But just as I started to relax, I noticed something strange, a moving truck. At first, I thought she was just having something delivered, but then I saw the unmistakable signs, boxes stacked on her porch, furniture being loaded into the truck, Linda standing outside with her arms crossed, barking orders at the movers. She was leaving. I couldn't believe it. After all these years of causing chaos, she was actually packing up and going. The neighborhood must have realized it too, because soon small groups of people started gathering outside, watching the spectacle unfold. It didn't take long for the celebrations to begin. Someone, probably Mrs. Thompson from down the street, set up a folding table with snacks. A few people brought out lawn chairs. It was like a community festival, but instead of fireworks, we had the joy of watching Linda's reign of terror come to an end. She must have noticed the impromptu party because, at one point, she spun around and yelled, "You people are disgusting. I'm leaving because this neighborhood is full of bullies." Someone in the crowd shouted back, "Bye, Linda." Another person added, "Don't steal any water on your way out." I had to turn away to keep from laughing as the final boxes were packed. Linda stomped to her car, still fuming. But just as she reached for the door handle, she turned and locked eyes with me. For a moment, I thought she was going to march over and start another argument, but instead, she smirked. That smirk sent a chill down my spine. "You think you've won," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "But I promise you, Mark, this isn't over." With that, she got into her car, slammed the door, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. The neighborhood erupted in cheers. People clapped, laughed, and toasted with plastic cups of lemonade. It was over. The nightmare had ended. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, a new sign appeared in front of Linda's old house. "For sale. New listing." At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw the name on the flyer taped to the sign, "Contact Diane Roberts." I froze. That name sounded familiar, too familiar. Then it hit me. Linda's sister. I stared at the sign, feeling my soul leave my body. The cycle was about to start all over again. The "for sale" sign stood ominously in front of Linda's old house, and the name Diane Roberts lingered in my mind like a dark cloud. I knew Linda had a sister, but I had never met her. Still, if she was anything like Linda, the neighborhood was in for another round of chaos. The house sold quickly, and within a month, Diane moved in. She was younger than Linda, with a more polished appearance, but there was something about her demeanor that set off alarm bells. She had the same sharp eyes and the same air of entitlement. I watched from my window as she unloaded her belongings, her movements precise and calculated. She didn't wave to anyone, didn't smile. She just went about her business, as if the neighborhood was beneath her. The first sign of trouble came a week later. I was out in my backyard, tending to my garden, when I noticed a faint trickle of water running along the edge of my property. I followed it, and sure enough, it led to Diane's yard. My heart sank. It was happening again. I approached the fence and peered over. Diane was standing there, holding a hose that was connected to my well. She looked up at me, her expression calm and unbothered. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "That's my water," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't just take it." Diane tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Oh, I didn't realize. I thought this was a shared resource. My sister mentioned something about it." I clenched my fists. "Your sister stole from me, and now you're doing the same. This is my well, on my property. You have no right to it." Diane shrugged. "Well, if you're so concerned, maybe we can come to an arrangement. I'm sure we can work something out." I shook my head. "There's no arrangement to be made. Stay away from my well." She smirked, and for a moment, I saw Linda in her. "We'll see about that." I knew I couldn't let Diane get away with this. I installed more security cameras, this time covering every angle of my property. I also contacted the HOA and the local water authority, giving them a heads up about Diane's actions. They were hesitant to get involved, given the history with Linda, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to let this slide. Diane, however, was more cunning than her sister. She didn't just steal water, she played the victim. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming that I was harassing her and trying to control the neighborhood's water supply. She even went as far as to suggest that I was hoarding water during a drought, painting me as the villain. The comments were mixed. Some people remembered Linda and were skeptical of Diane, but others fell for her act. The neighborhood was divided, and tensions were running high. One evening, I received a knock on my door. It was Rick, the head of the HOA, looking more stressed than usual. "Mark, we need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Diane has filed a formal complaint against you. She's claiming that you're harassing her and that you've been threatening her." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she is. Did you see the footage I sent you? She's stealing my water, just like Linda did." Rick sighed. "I saw it, but it's not enough. She's got people on her side, and she's playing the victim card perfectly. We need more evidence if we're going to take her down." I nodded. "I'll get it, but you need to be ready to act when I do." I decided to set a trap for Diane. I installed a motion-activated sprinkler system around my well, connected to a hidden camera. If she tried to steal water again, she'd get more than she bargained for. It didn't take long. A few nights later, I was woken up by the sound of the sprinklers going off. I checked the camera feed and saw Diane, drenched and furious, trying to disconnect the hose. I grabbed my phone and headed outside. "Diane," I called out, my voice calm but firm. "What are you doing?" She spun around, her face red with anger. "This is harassment. You're trying to drown me." I held up my phone, recording the entire scene. "No, Diane. I'm protecting my property. You're the one trespassing and stealing my water." She glared at me, but before she could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. I had called the police, and they arrived just in time to see Diane standing there, soaked and holding the hose. The officers took statements from both of us, and I handed over the footage from my security cameras. Diane tried to spin the story, but the evidence was undeniable. She was issued a warning and told to stay away from my property. Diane didn't take the warning seriously. She continued to stir up trouble in the neighborhood, spreading rumors and filing complaints against me. But I had the upper hand now. I had evidence, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I called another HOA meeting, this time with the police and the water authority present. I presented the footage of Diane stealing water, along with her false complaints and attempts to manipulate the neighborhood. The room was silent as I laid out the case against her. Diane tried to defend herself, but her lies were exposed one by one. The HOA had no choice but to take action. She was fined heavily, and the water authority launched an investigation into her property. It turned out she had been illegally modifying her water lines, just like Linda had. The final blow came when the police discovered that Diane had been involved in several other fraudulent activities in her previous neighborhood. She was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including theft and fraud. With Diane gone, the neighborhood finally found peace. The for sale sign went up again, but this time, the house was bought by a young family who quickly became beloved members of the community. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about standing up for what's right. I had faced two formidable opponents and come out on top, but I knew that there would always be people like Linda and Diane in the world. The key was to stay vigilant and never back down. One evening, as I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of lemonade, I noticed a small group of kids setting up a lemonade stand at the end of the street. I smiled and walked over, handing them a few dollars. "Keep the change," I said, winking at them. "And remember, always stand up for what's yours." The kids grinned, and I walked back to my house, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The water war was over, and I had emerged victorious. But more importantly, I had shown the neighborhood that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it means going to war. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.